welcome today to Ecosystem Awesome. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. My name is Alisa Cohn. I'm an executive coach. I moved to New York City about 10 years ago, and that's when I really started getting involved myself in the ecosystem that is New York City. So some of my clients are Foursquare, Venmo, Etsy, Envision, and then recently ConsenSys, which I'm very excited to be part of building the blockchain revolution. I'm also a part of Cornell Tech. So Cornell Tech has the Runway program. I'm the executive coach for the Runway program, which is the accelerator program within Cornell Tech. So you can see I'm really passionate about ecosystem and accelerators. And I'm very passionate about this panel, which I think is going to be a very interesting discussion about innovation in the ecosystem and also thinking about the future of ecosystems. So I'm going to introduce you guys, Shawn Cheng, who is the head of partnerships and programs at ConsenSys Labs. And so prior to that, he was an early stage investor with Gary Vaynerchuk's organization, investing arm, and he focused on VR, frontier tech, VR, AR, blockchain, AI, all the things, really, all the innovative things, right? And he's been involved with other global brands designing digital strategy for them. So one of the fun facts for Shawn is that he yesterday became a homeowner right here in Brooklyn. Yay! So he's from California originally, but putting down roots here in our ecosystem in New York City, which is fantastic. Okay, great. And then we have Prasant Sudhakaran, and he's the co-founder and director of corporate development at AiNGEL, which is a company that predicts the success of startups. And he's also an adjunct professor at New York University's School of Professional Studies. And prior to that, he spent 10 years in finance and analytics. So when I talked to Prasant earlier, I said, so your brand is data. And dead serious, he nodded at me like, yes, my brand is data. And we'll talk about the way your company uses data. And his fun fact is that he's visited over 25 Scotch distilleries, 25. And he's also very passionate about mixed martial arts. So talk to him about that as well. And then we have Caroline Hoffmann. She's the Chief Operating Officer for Republic, which is a platform focused on equity crowdfunding for both accredited and non-accredited investors. And she did her stint at McKinsey, like so many smart people, and she got her MBA from HBS, from Harvard. And she was originally born and raised in Germany and France, and she has 2 kids, and she's my neighbor on the Upper West Side. So Carolyn's fun fact is that she speaks Alsatian, which is a German, you're nodding like, yes, we all speak Alsatian, right? I know. Which is a German form of the dialect from Alsace. So she would say, Carolyn had said that very few people her age speak that. She picked it up from her grandparents. So that's who's on the panel today. I'm excited about this. And you guys, I'd like you to start by just maybe giving us like a 2-minute at most explanation of what your company does, because you're part of the ecosystem. So what is your part of the ecosystem? Carolyn, why don't you start?
Happy to start. Thank you, Alisa. So what Republic does, very simply put, is if you own a startup of any stage, we can help you fundraise, but we always say it's fundraising plus, because you're fundraising in a public setting where your campaign is not just a fundraising campaign, but a marketing campaign, and gives you customers, new users, and a ton of exposure. So that's our value proposition for fundraising. And you can, by the way, you can fundraise from everyone, not just people who are fairly wealthy. If you're an investor, our value proposition is that you can put in $25,000 if you want to, but you can also put in $50. And you can become an angel investor at your pace and at your scale and diversify your portfolio in a much faster way than you potentially could if you have finite resources and have to write a $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 dollar check every time. So that's in short our value proposition.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, so primarily what we do is we work with a lot of venture capital firms and accelerators and all that. And what we do is we collect a lot of data on the startups. Who are the founders? Like, what are the track records, their educational histories, etc. And then we have an algorithm to predict how successful these entities, well, these people coming together to form startups will be. So most of our clients are venture capital firms, but increasingly, we've also been working with accelerators and universities and all that. And more recently, we started working with, increased our association with accelerators because we see that one of the problems they had was, like, especially for demo day, like, what kind of people do you invite for that? Like, what kind of investors? So again, using data, we've kind of optimized which people you can invite for it. So it's kind of like Moneyball for VC. So, you don't have to go for the biggest names. You can just invite the more optimized venture capital firms for your cohort or the kind of people you have for that particular stage and so on. So that's what we do in a gist.
Great, thanks, Prasant. Shawn?
Hi everyone, my name is Shawn Cheng and I work at ConsenSys. ConsenSys is essentially a kind of ecosystem play around everything that is blockchain and Ethereum. So we help founders and serial entrepreneurs that want to use Ethereum or blockchain to build their next company. I work in the labs group, which is essentially the most intimate way that founders can build their company from within. But in addition to being able to be incubated, we run an EIR program, and we also bring in companies that strategically fit within our core protocol stack. But you may have met many other ConsenSys folks. It's 850 people. We're across 26 different countries right now. And if you just need capital, we have a ventures arm. If you need token advisory services, we have Token Foundry. If you're looking to actually learn more, we have an academy. And then if you're looking to do an engagement with a large corporation that wants to do a proof of concept, or with a sovereign nation, a central bank, a multinational corporation, everyone from JP Morgan to Microsoft, we have engagements with. And so very excited to be here and learn and meet all of you out there as well.
Great. Thanks, you guys. And by the way, I am going to at some point take questions, so think about the questions you have for this really great panel that has a lot of insight into this ecosystem here. And so let me start by asking you, who wants to define ecosystem? What can you tell? Can you describe or define what an ecosystem is? Prasant, do you want to start?
Yeah, so given that the word ecosystem comes from biology, so another word you can, or a concept you can borrow, could be what's known as a complex adaptive system. So you've got multiple components there, specifically about the venture ecosystem or the startup ecosystem. You've got the startups, you've got the founders, you've got the accelerators, the VCs, employees, and also customers. So if you want to see the strength of a certain ecosystem, the more complete these components are, the more strong the ecosystem is. So, which is something like, if you compare New York and California versus Montana or something, so it tells you, like, they might have some components, but not all the components. And California and New York have pretty much everything. So.
I cannot nearly be as complete in the definition or sophisticated in the definition of ecosystem. But what I've found interesting is this question of which ecosystem will survive, one versus the other, and accelerators versus VCs. And I think if you look at an ecosystem, that's not really the right question, right? If I put the startup at the center of it, which it should be, there's no like one or two, like there are no two distinct ecosystems. They both are part of the same ecosystem of making startups successful and helping them grow. Mm-hmm. At least that's how I think about it. I never define ourselves in opposition to VCs or to accelerators or anything like that.
But it continues to feed the
Exactly.
system. That's the point. Yeah, Shawn, did you want to add something? And Shawn, maybe you could also, I'd love to hear what you want to say, but maybe you guys are really building an ecosystem within an ecosystem right now. And you said 850, but I've heard it's like 1,000 employees, right? So, I mean, I think it's growing every day. Maybe you could share an experience also about what it is to be part of a really fast-growing ecosystem in and of itself.
So, I think blockchain as a ecosystem, the beautiful and scary thing about it is that it's global. It's not focused just on grads coming out of Silicon Valley. It's not New York centric because so many things are already, from finance to fashion. And what's amazing about blockchain and cryptocurrencies is that you're seeing activity all around the world. And so ConsenSys has actually really wanted to try to embrace that, which is why we're in so many different markets. And so the way that we see it, we essentially take every single problem and every single challenge that would prevent this ecosystem from building what we call an unstoppable internet. not from any government, not from any centralized organization, not from any individual, from being able to build something that is centered around the individual, not around the larger institutions that may rule our data today. Won't mention who they are, but we all know who owns all our data right now, which is another hot topic. But ConsenSys is really trying to put the power back into each and every one of your hands. So whatever the product or the service is, we want to be thinking about the energy that goes into it, the hardware that's into it, the actual protocols that allow for you to be able to have that internet, the regulation, the usability, all the things that actually go into that to make a full entire ecosystem.
Got it. So it's those pieces of the ecosystem. You know, Shawn and Caroline, you both just touched on something which really relates to, it's not about the entity, it's not about the VC, it's about the startup, it's about the individual. And there was a question this morning I wanted to get your response to. There's a question this morning about that accelerators sometimes feel like the Ivy League, that you have to in some way have pedigree to get into the accelerators. They're very choosy. You have to have some money maybe. You maybe have to have connections. And so I guess I'm curious what you think about the way you're now, you two and Prasant, you too, about the way you're coming to the table and maybe leveling the playing field for people who may not have access. Caroline, do you want to address that first?
Sure. So first of all, about accelerators and the Ivy League, I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because accelerators are similar to Ivy League in expensive access to connections and connectivity and network and funds, etc. And I've heard of plenty of founders who said, well, I'm actually not willing to give up the 6-7% that are required for me very early on to leave on the table in order to go through a name accelerator. I think that's one point of view. I think that's also why we're seeing accelerators emerge that have a very different model, right? Grand Center Tech, that just rebranded as company, has a very different model because of that, because they're saying we're not getting the best if we do that. So now talking about leveling the playing field, I think the way we look at it as Republic is that there are lots of great ideas out there, and especially if you are a founder who's not based in New York or not based in Silicon Valley, you may actually just not have the connections to name brand VCs, or you may not happen to have a ton of rich uncles who can write the first couple of checks of seed money. But we think that great ideas are really everywhere, and that equity crowdfunding is a way to actually get those first checks through the door. We don't like to take companies in the ideas phase. We want to see a little bit of traction, but that traction can be at a scale that helps them to prove their concept and then fundraise for more. And we also see ourselves as a way to accelerate growth for more mature companies and gain exposure and more breadth and depth in their customer base and building loyalty in their customer base if they're later stage. And I think we see ourselves very much as an addition in the ecosystem that can add breadth and depth, but doesn't see itself in opposition.
Got it, yeah. Do either of you want to add something to that? You don't have to. You can. Go. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think even the very power dynamic between how companies and investors interact is challenged by blockchain itself. So if Web 2 in tech VC land, they were a cool kids club that acts as a gateway for whether or not you have access to capital, you saw with the multiple billions of dollars that went into blockchain and crypto-based currency projects over this last year, dwarfing that of the total amount of money that went into VC companies. You could argue that it's totally permissionless. That when you raise an ERC20 token, that a lot of these projects now, funding wasn't the problem. Now it's talent, now it's regulation, now it's many, many other things that prevent them or are their next challenges that they have to, I guess, conquer in order to kind of take it to the next level. And so there is a little bit of a rethinking of what does it mean to even add decentralization to how people not only gain access to capital, but even how investors do diligence. Because you can cryptographically verify and say, hey, who has actually contributed to the diligence of whether or not this company or this project is going to succeed based off of multiple sources of data.
So you can get sort of more finite and more granular, and then there's also more access for everybody. Prasant, in light of this and other thoughts that are coming up for ecosystems, I guess I would ask you, what do you think is going to be scale and sort of survive in the new reality, and what do you think is going to start fading away and really being disrupted?
So I think whether it's GDPs or companies or even universities, accelerators, ultimately things converge towards size. So you'll have, so in the accelerator space, you've got Techstars, 500, and Y Combinator, who are predominantly, in a very dominant position, and you'll be hard pressed to, like, if you go and say, name the top 5, accelerators in the world or something, people will be very hard pressed to name outside of these 3. Of course, you might know, a few of the smaller ones in New York City, or one in Boulder, and so on. So ultimately, things will gravitate towards how much deal flow they have, how much investing power they have, and all that. So, and basically, you're paying that 6 or 7% equity or 10% equity. You're buying into that accelerators network. And if you look at the data coming out, people coming out of 500 or people coming out of Y Combinator, the amount of funding they're able to raise right after graduating from that compared to many of the programs. So, it's like a no-brainer for a lot of people. So if you're running a program of that nature, and if you want to, establish your USP, it could be that, hey, if you come to us, we can maybe, not exactly like maybe a Techstars, but maybe in a comparable, the same ballpark or something. So if you can, if not guarantee that, at least put them, at least ease their fears that they will be able to raise something of that nature, there might be value proposition there.
Do you have anything to add, either of you, in terms of the future? What do you see, Caroline? What do you see sort of surviving in this disrupted environment, or this accelerating environment in many ways, and what do you see staying the same?
I think it's a really hard question. I don't have a crystal ball. What I see, though, is more acceptance of more diverse founder profiles, more openness by also more traditional funding sources for more diverse founder profiles, and I think a little bit of increased awareness of existing blind spots, right? So I think what we're seeing is the equity crowdfunding industry is only 2 years old, but what we're seeing is increased acceptance of equity crowdfunding as being a truly distinct source of deal flow that has its right to exist because it helps level the playing field and helps bring great ideas to fruition that otherwise would have been ignored.
So again, not sort of being, second class in some ways because of lack of pedigree.
And complementary. And we have great founders who also very consciously don't choose the VC round. Repeat founders said, I actually don't want to give ownership up so early, or not that much and not so concentrated in a couple of VCs. So I'm turning to people who I want to see be my customers first. So we see lots of new use cases emerge, but I think the one change that I would say I've seen the last year that I found interesting is more awareness of blind spots in the traditional fundraising ecosystem.
It's those blind spots being like enlightened, and then other, I think, uses or other venues coming in to sort of fill them up. Shawn, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think period over period, some of the things that'll stay constant, human relationships and storytelling. I think human relationships, whether or not you are someone that actually is additive in helping the ecosystem and actually helping companies and actually doing right by the people that are looking to collaborate, that's going to be persistent. And then also, one of the biggest problems within blockchain and cryptocurrency, especially with respect to how different programs are run, is oftentimes the space wants to talk at you, wants to teach you about every single thing possible that can be done, whether it's interoperability or immutability or censorship resistance or self-sovereignty, all these very, very large and complex problems when a lot of times people don't care. And they actually want to know about some of the benefits first, and maybe even why you're doing what you're doing versus even what you're doing. And so I'm really excited to kind of see how this wave of technology actually has a greater degree of humanity infused into it. Because I think in Web 2.0, a lot of technologies, you're able to get away with still separating the two. But I believe that, with your MetaMask wallet on your browser, you can start to actually infuse your values and principles. I will not do business with companies that have poor supply chains. I will not do business with political folks that actually have aspects and things that are antithetical to what I believe. And maybe your browser-based wallet, maybe your cryptocurrency doesn't touch anything that you disagree with. And I think that that's one of the best things that we can see, so that the individual themselves can actually live and vote on a regular basis. Because I believe how you spend your money and where you spend your time, we vote every day. And that reinforces the structures and the businesses and the services that we see all around us.
Yeah. I'm laughing because you're using so many sort of blockchain terms, right? We'll do a master class after this at some point on blockchain to get the terminology down. So we've talked about the elements of the ecosystem. We've talked about the individuals. And we've talked a little bit about sort of democratization of all of that. But what about the startups? How are they going to have to change when they have a whole bunch of different options available to them, different ways to make decisions? In some ways, openings and expansion can be very difficult to sort of take in. How are startups going to have to change in light of this, and also think about how they go for funding in a different way?
I think it's more complex than ever, right? As a founder, you have so many different options and so many different things to learn about, in addition to just thinking about your business. Mm-hmm. And I think those that tell a more compelling story, and those that actually are able to illuminate the most beneficial aspects of what will take their company to the next phase and to the next step. So if you're an early stage company, testing your assumptions, trying to get to product market fit, understanding all of your possible customers, the people that are helping you along the way, those that are actually able to prove that consistently, I think should be the signal that founders focus on in terms of where they head. And it may come in the form of an individual, an accelerator, an incubator. And again, I think it goes back to my first thing that I don't think changes, which is people and the individuals that actually are good and actually helping you, not trying to take advantage of you or feed off of you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Caroline, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing that I think every founder has in common, is that being a founder is kind of overwhelming, and there is no shortage of advice they will get, but at the end of the day, they're still by themselves or with a co-founder or two co-founders. Yeah. And I think what distinguishes really good founders is the ability to not get distracted by that and be able to approach problems, one problem, two problems at a time, and break those down and look at available options and take it from there. Yeah. So for us, for example, we see founders in all different stages of them founding a company. We stay in touch with a lot of founders who we tell it's a little bit too early. We look at blockchain companies, we look at non-blockchain companies. I personally don't think that blockchain is the right answer for many founders who we see. And I think the founders that stand out are those who are very thoughtful about what is the right thing to do for my company right now, and stay really focused on these things and don't get distracted by the 50 conferences they can attend every day in New York City, the 30 marketing campaigns they could be launching, and the 50 people they could potentially pitch, or the 3 different types of crowdfunding campaigns they could be running at the same time. So I think that's a focus and the ability to leverage their network in a thoughtful and meaningful way rather than getting too distracted.
Yeah. So people and relationships never goes out of style, and focus never goes out of style. I'm going to, in a minute, ask if there are questions from the audience. I just want to ask Prasant, from your data, your data sets, and your predicting startup success, What can you share with us about your take on what can predict startup success? What are the elements that would make a startup more successful?
So it's very hard for me to pinpoint exactly what it is, but some of the things we do notice that information diversity within teams. So for example, if you have an arts major and a science major or something, that's typically a good combination to have. So, but beyond that, it's very hard for me to, qualify what that might be.
Because you want to check the data. We'll come back to you in 5 years. I think you'll have some good insights on that. Okay. Actually, before I ask the audience, does the panel have any questions they want to ask each other?
My question is, right now, blockchain seems to be one of the coolest topics right now.
Says you.
So cool, guys. It's so cool. I'm curious about what happens when it's not. I'm excited for when the entire blockchain or cryptocurrency thematic, or people that treat it as a thematic, gets crushed.
Well, is this a question for the panel?
Yeah. Because it is, some of the companies that are probably raising their hands to say, I'm a blockchain company. I'm excited for folks that aren't really thinking about it thoughtfully, that aren't thinking about the problem, like if it's even right. They're just trying to sprinkle some blockchain dust on it, and hopefully it's the right solution. How do we, as people that are enablers and people that are trying to empower them, react when it's not something that's right for everyone?
So I actually think it's not as cool as it was 6 months ago. So maybe we have the answer right here. We see blockchain companies all the time, and and actually I think the cooling off is a good thing, because we're a fundraising platform. There's way too much fraud and scams, etc. And companies going for the big ICO, which even 6 months ago we told them it's not compliant, it's never going to be compliant, you'll have the SEC knocking at your door, doing it and not getting away with it in the long run. And I think the people who are trying to build blockchain thoughtfully and in a regulatory compliant way are ultimately going to be there. And there's going to be a lot less money in the space than the money that flowed there 6 months ago. But all of that is for good reasons, because you probably don't want to have that money in the first place that went there 6 months ago. So anyways, the not as much insider as you, but still somehow tied to blockchain person says it's a lot less cool than I thought it was 6 months ago.
Maybe the irrational exuberance is fading. Yeah.
And I think it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say life goes on, because like in the 80s you had like everything was financed by junk bonds, and you had junk bond king and everything right here in New York, and all kinds of deals were financed by junk bonds and acquisitions, mergers, and then it imploded. The market overnight literally imploded because some people got arrested and all that, and you kind of see a parallel, but obviously the timeline has not been a decade, it's been more like 8 months. So but yeah, these things come in cycles. So I think life goes on. So it's just one asset class, right? So there's plenty of others.
Yeah. I'm just going to ask the audience for questions. I see the gentleman in the red sweatshirt. Yeah, you? Yeah. Great.
Hi everybody, my name's Jose Garcia. I'm with Angel Hack. We run the largest pre-seed stage accelerator in the world. I run the New York program. So what's interesting about blockchain is that 10 years ago it was called Trusted Platform Modules, didn't do well, so it's been rebranded. So that could be an insight there. But getting to the question, one of the biggest challenges obviously is you have a lot of great startups that don't get their stories out there, and quite frankly it's hard to find it. That discovery is a big part of the challenge with the ecosystem. Now, what's being done because you guys are in the know, you're like looking for these startups, that discovery is a big piece. What's being done to really help lead to better discovery? Because we're, the biggest, for better or worse, VCs and accelerators, we've become pattern recognizers. And while we're great at looking for the things that, will make us more money, will make us more successful, we're missing out on the possibilities that could be right in front of us that we just don't see it.
So I would say some VCs, or at least, they do recognize that if you follow exactly what other people do, you'll get exactly the same results, and so, and you want to be ahead of the curve. So at least a lot of the ones that we speak to, they do recognize the problem, and they are trying to look at different sources. And I mean, primarily it's a sourcing problem, right? So if you if you are like a New York or a California-based VC, but if you don't go to like Austin or Boulder or something, and you're missing out on a lot of opportunities there. So I see people trying to run programs like within these locations outside the US. So I would say you have to go out there or at least form partnerships, and these are some of the ways that at least I've come across VCs working on this.
I think you also have to change a little bit the lens with which you're looking at something, right? So VCs look at it with a pure returns lens. And when we look at equity crowdfunding opportunities, we don't do IRR calculations, and we don't say this is going to return me 15x, 100x, 200x. I think partly because of that, we have 50% female founders, 25% or so of founders, underserved founders of color, which means Latino and African American founders. And that's because we put a slightly different lens on it, and we also, to a large extent, let the crowd decide, their customers, our users, if this is something that they want to be an investor in. And I think if you change the lens with which you look at a business opportunity, you're unlocking markets that have been underserved and that different types of founders are trying to tackle.
So expands the scope. That's great. Vicky's next.
How you read that? That's crazy.
Pretty good, right?
Yeah. So I'm a VC from Australia and Asia Pac. So blockchain is apparently still cool there. So only in New York where they say that everything's now slow or over. But my question to you, to all the panel actually, is you're operating in industries where it's quite forward thinking, and it's all about democratization, giving the power back to the individual. I want you sort of to fast forward into the future and tell me what is the highest and best use case for the technologies that you're playing with, and not the normal answer of giving the power back to the individual. What are the really crazy things that you see, or the things that an insider would note that maybe someone outside wouldn't really have a perspective of?
So what do you guys see from your vantage points? That's something that's new and different, innovative.
Well, it's a challenging question. I think it's a really, really good one, because we are faced with the problem of there is no mass market winner yet. CryptoKitties doesn't count. 26 million, it's still myopic in comparison to that of just a regular Web 2.0 app that's doing well. And so I guess the way that I think about it is that blockchain and cryptocurrencies in general, to me, act as an accelerant across all industries. The same way that you might think of AI. So AI, from robotics all the way to natural language processing and ML and deep learning and all these other aspects of it, it can make almost every aspect of your life better. And if blockchain is one of the ultimate sources of creating more data and cryptographically protected data, and data that which can touch everything from the gel in my hair to the socks on my feet, then I don't know. I think each of these things may be unremarkable when called out individually, but altogether allowing for me to live a life that is far more aligned with what I actually care about is something that I feel as though is the most exciting thing. I'm excited for people in Argentina that get taken advantage of by their government and that say, hey, I'm inflating your capital so that a cup of coffee is a ridiculous amount of physical cash that I need to put on it. That's wrong. And I'm excited for the liberation of that. And I'm also excited for, of the 8 billion people that are in this world, 2.6 billion people don't have identification. How do you get a job? How do you go to school? How do you receive, government benefits if you have no identification, if you're a refugee? Those things are not matters of not just technology being applied, but to me are are things that we as a people and we as humanity need to be thinking about that aren't necessarily extremely profitable, like as an investor would think about, but.
And also those are the outcomes of technology. You're
Yes.
talking innovative outcomes. That's great. Yeah. Caroline?
So I don't think I can speak about like a specific technology. I can think about like what we're building and what we're trying to change. So who of you has Dash Invest, Robinhood, TD Ameritrade, etc.? Can you raise your hand? Who of you like uses some sort of online stockbroker? Yeah, E-Trade, something. Right. It's all public stocks. It's all ETFs. What we're trying to build is this for private investing. We want to, and we're starting with equity crowdfunding, but there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to do the exact same thing with private companies from your phone and in small tranches, because no one requires you to buy a full share of Apple stock, for example. So that's how we think about it, and that's what I think is really interesting and potentially really transformative, because it gives an asset class to people, a fully new asset class to everyone, not just those people who previously had access to, which were accredited investors.
Right. Your point is also unaccredited investors.
Exactly. Everyone, all of you. And you
right.
can invest in public stocks and ETFs, etc., but you haven't been able to invest in startups, and that's what we're trying to build. But it's not just startups, private companies, the private market.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any insights from your data set?
So are we talking about what should happen or what might happen? Right, because while the popular thing to say might be that power to the people and everything, but the reality is that, there's this thing called the power law, and it's universal. And whether you're looking at the mass of stars, or whether it's like the amount of money that someone has and, the distribution of it, ultimately, whether it's companies, whether it's people, it all tends towards, size and momentum. So yeah, it's in theory, it's a cool thing to say, power to the individual, but I don't think it's ever going to happen, because that's who we are.
One more question. I'm going to look over here, see if there are any questions over here. No, you guys are just all taking it in. You have a question? Yeah, in the back. John? Vicky, that was pretty good, right? He's far away. Yeah. John?
10 out of 10. What is a blockchain company? Is it a company that utilizes blockchain as a technology, or is it a company that's raised money through an ICO and therefore has some of its...
Let's give a quick answer since it's so specific, and see if we can get this young lady in the front too. Can you a quick answer?
I think both. Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Daryl.
Hi, everybody. Wow, sorry. My name's Daryl. I'm the founder of Holy Rad Studio.
Of what?
I'm the founder of Holy Rad Studio.
Holy Rad Studio.
Yeah, it's a production agency based in Brooklyn. And I'm slowly sort of realizing that I unintentionally started an accelerator program, but not in tech, but in visual media. And something that I'm noticing in this conversation is talking, or something that you said, Shawn, was about how we vote with our purchasing power. But that's under the assumption that everybody has the privilege of that vote. If you're in a food desert, if you're in a tech desert, if you're in a resource desert, that's not a possibility if your only choice is a certain amount of choices, which is why I think what both you and Caroline are doing with your companies is actually not thinking about how will accelerators survive, but how accelerators and companies like yourselves will influence or actually perpetuate potentially systematic oppression, lack of resources, and redistributing wealth. And also, I guess my question really is like, how are VCs thinking about this, right? Because as an investor, you're thinking about money and productivity, but then we also need to think about and incorporate the well-being of us as a people, right? So I would love to have some positive information about other VCs and accelerators that think about humanity just as much of a priority as they do about money.
We love it. Was that a question?
Yeah.
So or,
I would love to find out more information about other people who are approaching VCs and accelerators the way that both of you are. Asking about the human aspect.
Got it.
Human aspect. Yeah.
Good. So actually, I'd love you to address that and sort of think of this also as your closing statement, like as in the thing you want everyone to be left with is, right? So you can answer that question and also just share if there's one thing you want to remember from this session, it is this. Caroline, do you want to start?
I'll just start with Join Republic. It's and just check it out. But to answer your question, let me give you an example. I can't speak about VCs and throw out 10 VC names because I would probably forget another 10, and I'm not a VC. But we recently had a company raise on our platform that was VC backed, that does exactly that. They are called Everytable. Think of them a little bit as a Sweetgreens, but with dynamic pricing based on where they are. So if they're in a food desert and they deliberately implanted themselves in places that are food deserts with less healthy food options, they are priced differently from when they're, I don't know, in Santa Monica. California-based, backed by traditional VCs, ran a campaign on our platform to acquire users. They were on Shark Tank as well. And I think they're a good example of something that is VC-backed, cares about the causes that you mentioned, and does something good. And Join Republic.
So VCs are always looking at like financial returns because even they have investors. So they are answerable to their investors, their LPs, and you have a certain amount of time to make a certain amount of return, so hence the pressures. But having said that, I think increasingly a lot of VCs actually realize that you cannot invest exactly the way other people are, so you have to either look at different people or different markets, or in terms of geography, or even the kind of areas you operate in. So that awareness is definitely there, and and things are evolving anyway. So I think that's the trajectory it's on, and once it's on a certain trajectory, it's very hard to pull it off that. So yeah.
I would say, as founders in the room, understand who you're taking your money from. VCs, especially for that question, VCs have limited partners that invest into their funds, or they're investing out of their own pockets, right, as a family office. And you want to ask yourself as a founder, do I want to be working and partnering with this person, with this company, even though it may be a name brand VC fund or accelerator, and do I want to be making more money for them if I do succeed? I think that's a very, very important question to ask, because oftentimes that doesn't get asked, and the focus is more about keeping your startup alive because that's your baby. That's the number one thing that you eat, sleep, and think about all day long. And so for ConsenSys, a few resources that I would point towards. We have a whole initiative around it, Blockchain for Social Impact. It's not just ConsenSys. We actually are looking for people to partner with to actually exemplify and infuse humanity into this technology. And so one example of that would be working with the World Food Program and the UN, and actually using Uport self-sovereignty to be able to gain access to groceries as a Syrian refugee. So 6 miles off the border of Jordan right now, there are people that are using a private blockchain to do that. And I think that's pretty cool. And I'm excited for organizations like Women in Blockchain. I'm excited for that particular sector to right the wrongs and the income disparity between men and women, and also people of color, especially in Web 2. I don't know. I think to be taking crazy swings does take a lot of idealism, and you do have to be a little crazy to actually stake your entire life on it. But my hope is that even for some of us crazies in the room that actually make it and actually get to a position of power and can speak for others and can actually bring more transparency to the system, that it's decision by decision and company by company, and I think ConsenSys does stand for those things.
Thank you, panel. It's a great discussion. Thank you, audience. Appreciate your participation.
Okay, everybody, we're just going to keep this train a-chugging. All right, one more round of applause for the incredible panel. Good. Oh my God. The moral of the story: don't take